Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, and joined as always is Shayne Kubas. We are going to talk a little bit about Brian Flores this morning. We're going to do kind of a little bit of a free agency mock, if you will, and we're going to kind of go through the names. We've got the cap calculator pulled up here. We'll talk about the players the Steelers could cut and what they should do with the money, although we know that never actually works out the way that we want it to. Not to a T exactly, but we can get pretty close. So we're going to do that. Let's talk about Flores for a minute, Shayne. It's funny because I feel like these last couple of days were just a roller coaster with him. It's like, is he staying in Pittsburgh? We haven't heard anything in a little bit. And then we hear a few hours later, it's like, all right, he's got a second interview with the Cardinals. And nope, now he's the defensive coordinator of the Vikings. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, first of all, just for any returning viewers, if you're wondering why I look the way I do right now, it's because I'm on a laptop. We had some technical difficulties on my end, but I'm good, so I'm glad I was able to do that. But as far as Flores goes, this is what I kind of expected. At some point, he was going to get an offer that he liked, and someone was going to make him either defensive coordinator or maybe even a head coach. You know, Cardinals getting a second interview. But I think it's a good move for him. I think that Minnesota definitely, they need an uptick on defense. Clearly, their offense was pretty good throughout the entire season, and it's really a big reason why they were able to have the success they did. But in the playoffs, they couldn't get it done against, the Giants offense, which isn't exactly talent ridden outside of maybe Saquon Barkley. So I think it's a good opportunity for him to, if he can make it an even league average defense or get it back to where, they kind of were 5, 6, 7 years ago under Zimmer, then it'll really boost his stock and give him the opportunity to maybe be a head coach again here soon.
Yeah, and we made our predictions when Andrew False was on the podcast with us, whether or not he would be gone this season or whether he'd wait a season. And I thought at the time, I said there's these 5 openings still.
Yeah.
And he's been a strong candidate. And so I'm not surprised to see him go. He's going to try to look to turn that Vikings defense around. That defense ranked 30th or worse in points per game and yards allowed per game. And so he'll see what he can do there. Obviously, he had some success in Miami before coming to the Steelers. 2019 was a little bit rough when he started his career, but he was involved in a couple of good defenses. Was a good assistant for the Steelers, and I think played kind of an important role. I know everybody wants to point to, well, he's a linebackers coach, and look how sucky our linebackers were this year. So I think there might be a talent issue there that's kind of beyond Flores' control. So I do think that Flores will do a decent job in turning that around. His scheme, though, and for those wondering why maybe the Steelers didn't consider keeping him or throw more money at him or whatever, Flores' defensive schemes they really require good cornerback play and very high investments at the position. You got to pay a lot of money. You got to pay high draft choices. And maybe that's just something where maybe Tomlin wasn't willing to compromise there. And obviously there's not a good enough reason to get rid of Terrell Austin at this point in time. Austin did a good enough job with the defense, got better in the second half of the season. And so for those wondering, that's probably the reason why that Flores isn't sticking around. He's not going to be the second coming of Mike Tomlin, not in Pittsburgh anyway. But he could carve out a great career of his own in the coaching department. Let's talk a little bit about the Senior Bowl, Shayne, that just wrapped up this week. Did you get a chance to watch any practice film or the Senior Bowl game at all?
Not really any practice film. I was going to get my credentials this year, but a lot of stuff was going on. Didn't really have time to do that. But I did get to watch the game a little bit. I did hear a lot from friends of mine who were actually down in Mobile, so hopefully I'll be able to join them next year. But yeah, again, the offensive lineman especially, and this is obviously a strength of this class, I think, in my opinion, and also a strength or something that the Steelers need to strengthen on their roster for sure, even though the offensive line played better than we expected. But again, a lot of that was due to health, continuity. Can't, expect that every season. They still need to upgrade really pretty much every spot, I would say, except for, James Daniels' spot on the offensive line. They can get better at, I think, relatively easily. So there's a lot of guys that I think even some guys maybe in the mid rounds at the Senior Bowl that I think would be interesting for the Steelers for sure.
Yeah, I definitely narrowed in when I turned on the all 22 film there. There were some things I skipped. Like, I'm not going to sit there and watch the place kickers at the Senior Bowl, that kind of stuff. But
yeah, we're not that crazy. We're crazy, but we're not that crazy.
No. I mean, I got better things to do with my time than that. But I think the most telling thing, Shayne, year after year, this is consistent for every year at the Senior Bowl, is the O-line versus D-line pass rush drills. And I think that is where you can really say, okay, this guy's good. This guy can stonewall whatever defender he's going against. And we've seen that in the past. It's why players like I wasn't surprised to see Creed Humphrey become a really good NFL player. Quinn Miners, those are just two examples from the 2021 class, and the ones that a lot of Steelers fans liked. I think this is the most telling drill that they run during practice at Senior Bowl week. And so I ran through that twice each for the national and the American team. And there were some good players there. I mean, I was really impressed. Osiris Torrance, probably the most overall impressive lineman there, just has everything that you want. He's out of Florida there, and potential first round pick. I don't know how you feel about a guard in the first round. I've expressed that in the past, but you are beefing up the trenches. So that's a name that will definitely be on Steelers' radar, I would have to think. The other guard I was really impressed with was Steve Avila from TCU. He did really well there. Couple tackles. Darnell Wright impressed me more than I thought he would out of Tennessee. And like Cody Mach was like a fan favorite there too. He had like the flowing locks out of North Dakota State. Yep. So yeah, well, these are definitely guys we'll be talking about during the pre-draft process here. Obviously, the Steelers, they have a line in place. They've got guys that are under contract, but that's obviously an area of their team that could be improved.
Yeah, I'd like to see at least 2 draft picks in the first 2 days go towards offensive linemen, whether that's, ideally I'd like to get a tackle early if you can get one, if someone on the board is still in that value at that point, which it's kind of hard to say at this point. I feel like it kind of depends on how the top of the board falls and see how many teams want to go tackle early on. If we can get one of those top three-ish guys at 17, I think it makes a lot of sense. And if not, back into the first or, right in that 32nd pick that, again, basically is a first-round pick, even though it won't count as one, getting a guy like that, tackle, and then filling in a guard spot or bringing in someone who can at least compete at guard or even center, maybe, depending on who's there. So.
Yeah, and it's not a position that you want to settle at. Like we harp on this all the time. It's because, I mean, it's too important. You can't just you can't settle for what you have and no draft investments. I mean, the Steelers, we're going on. This will be the 13th year the Steelers have not spent a first or second round pick on an offensive lineman. And I believe we're at 9 years now, coming up on 9 years for the defensive line, where that's true on the defensive line as well. So the trenches, we can't ignore that any longer. You look at a team like the Eagles. I mean, they are loaded with mammoths along that line. And Andy Weidel was part of that, spending those draft investments on players like Landon Dickerson, Jordan Mailata, and their line has really developed into just one of the best units in the league. And I think it's part of the reason why Jalen Hurts is having so much success in Philly too. When you're protected, your quarterback's going to have a lot of confidence. I think the Steelers would be wise to do the same and help pick it in that way. All right, Shane, we're going to move on to our first topic here. We've got the salary cap calculator pulled up. We're kind of going to do a little bit of a mock offseason. Maybe we'll do this a little bit more in depth down the line. But what I want to do is we're going to go through the names, starting at the top of the list. And I want to see which ones we can agree on to say, yeah, this is a player the Steelers are going to cut. And then we've got the calculator right here, and we're going to do the math, and we're going to find out how much cap space theoretically the Steelers might have to work with entering this free agency period. And then we'll kind of get into what they can do with that type of money. So let's look at this right now. I've got 2023 pulled up. This is from Over the Cap. The Steelers sit just above $1 million in cap space. That's not very much. And that was with the boost that they got in the salary cap just recently for the 2023 offseason. Now, the good news is there's definitely players that Pittsburgh can get rid of to help that cap go up. So we're going to find out just how much. Let's start right at the top of the list here. I'm going to say yay or nay, Shane, and you go ahead and voice your opinion. And some of these are going to be really easy. Some are going to be a little bit more challenging. And so if we're just looking at cap numbers for the 2023 season, moving down the list, first on the list, Minkah Fitzpatrick not being touched.
Yeah, I think that, it's probably still even too early to do any restructuring with him, even just to free up space. I think they'll let that go for a year, but it's definitely not including him going anywhere. We can say that. I'm
kind of opposed to that. I think the window needs to be right, Shane, for those restructures. Yes, and I think the problem the Steelers have run into in these last few years is they've done restructures with the false hope that they were in that Super Bowl window when they actually were not. And that's when they get in trouble. And you got a guy like Cameron Hayward, who's going to have a massive cap hit, and it's not Cam's fault. It's just the way that Colbert structured the contracts, unfortunately. Yeah. So it's an absolute no on Minkah Fitzpatrick. Deontay Johnson is next on the list. He's got a cap number $16.3 million this year. I know that some fans would like to see him go, but and that's not happening.
Yeah, I don't think he goes. Now, I could see this as a restructure candidate as far as trying to free up some money by adding, like doing the void year stuff like that. Just because, again, that cap hit isn't ginormous for a starting receiver at this point, especially with the way the cap has gone up and with the way the receivers are getting paid. But it's a place you could save a little bit of money considering the way the deal is structured. So that is not a cut for sure, but you could see money moving around a little bit there.
Yeah, and I think that that's a possibility. Johnson is set to cost the Steelers over $16 million this year, which based on how he played last season, I mean, that seems a little bit steep. Now, technically, if you were to make Johnson a post-June 1st cut, which I don't think they will, the Steelers could save $10.5 million, which is a substantial amount, but Johnson's not getting cut. We know that. Yeah. So those people who are just wanting him gone at all costs, that's not happening this year. By the next season, if he does not take a big step forward, then a cut is certainly possible in his future there. Next on the list, Chukwuma Okorafor. I know Andrew talked about him a little bit that way. I don't think that you can leave yourself that bare at right tackle unless you certainly have an answer there. Cutting Okorafor, it would only net you $6.9 million, which it's a chunk of money, but you got to account for displacement. So you got to use that money to replace the guy. Now, Okorafor, like Johnson, could save you over $10 million if you make him a post-June 1st cut, which means you pushed it back to that deadline. And so if you do that, that'll save you $10 million, but you still don't have a right tackle. And I'm not trusting Trent Scott or Jesse Davis in that role, or we don't know what's going to happen in free agency and how Steelers are going to spend that money or what they can do with it. So we're saying no on that one, right?
Yeah, you can't leave yourself, like you said, wide open to having to fill a right tackle spot through the draft or free agency just to save up, save $7 million. It's just not really worth that.
No, they don't want to put themselves in a position where they have to be pigeonholed into doing one specific thing in the draft because that might not be where the talent lines up.
Right.
And I think they would leave themselves very bare there. This next one, easiest decision the Steelers could make this offseason. I wrote about it a couple of times. William Jackson is set to cost the cornerback. William Jackson set to cost the Steelers over $12.1 million against the cap this year. And they can save 100% of that money if they cut him. That is an easy decision.
Yeah, I don't think the question is whether they cut him. It's whether he gets an offer to come back in camp or something. That's probably the only thing you really question with that. Outside of that, he's not going to be on the football team, at least not at that number.
Yep, I agree. We've said that before. Jackson's going to get cut, and then at that point, he can decide, do I want to come back on a contract that's maybe a little bit over veteran minimum, and that's about it. I don't see anybody else offering a 30-year-old cornerback with back issues a big contract. No, and so fortunately, because he didn't play, that didn't end up costing the Steelers that compensatory pick. So now we've moved from $1 million above the cap to $13.2 million. And so moving down the list, we got Miles Jack. A lot of controversy over this one. I am certainly, Shane, in the camp that the Steelers should cut Jack. I don't think that he's a great player. I don't think that he's an above average starter. And I think that for the displacement money, when it comes to Jack, I think you can find a better player and perhaps save money in the process, or at least put the Jack savings towards that player who's going to be a significant upgrade. Do you view it the same way, or do you want him? You want Steelers to keep him around?
Ideally, because we have nothing at linebacker right now, including guys that aren't going to be on the team unless they were signed, you would love to be able to have somebody who at least has been on the team. And it's probably going to end up being Spillane. I think he'll end up being back on a small deal. So because of that, Jack's it's just too much money. I mean, if he wants to come back on a much cheaper deal, then I think there's a conversation to be had there just because he was just in the system. But I just don't think it can be at the cap hit that he's at. And I don't want to see, and you've mentioned it before, no void years, no restructuring, like just cut him, bring him back if he wants to come back at a cheaper deal. If he doesn't, then he can go elsewhere.
I've seen a lot of different arguments too about why fans want to keep him. And that's one of them. They say, well, then who's coming back? And my question back to that is Jack good enough to play at the $11.2 million price tag and I don't think he is either. And I don't think that he's that far above a replacement level linebacker that you would say, yeah, let's do this, especially considering Jack and Bush, they both essentially got demoted late in the season.
Yeah,
I mean, these guys were
they didn't play. Yeah.
They were playing a fraction of the snaps that they played early on in favor of Spillane and even Mark Robinson the last couple of games, because the Steelers wanted to see what they had in other guys. And this was when they were still obviously in the race. They were up in the playoff hunt until the very last moments when the clock ticked down, because they were relying on that Jets game there. And I mean, I just can't get behind it at all. Now, the question becomes, Shane, is not what we think, but what do you think the Steelers are going to do with Jack? Do you think that the Steelers would consider cutting him? I think something has to be done. Can we agree that something has to be done with Jack?
They need to do something with his cap number. Ideally, it's cut him and give him the opportunity to come back on a deal that favors the Steelers more. That's the best outcome if he's going to still be here. But it's probably more likely going to be some sort of restructuring situation, just knowing the Steelers. I think they don't want to have the cupboard be bare at linebacker again. That does depend on what they plan to do in free agency, obviously. I think if they fully intend on bringing in a few bodies at that position, maybe not for a lot of money, but enough to have guys there that can play if need be, then you may see Jack be cut. And it may even be after they sign a few guys. Maybe they determine that who they want to bring in, that, they get them under contract, and then they tell Jack, like, hey, too bad, basically. Like, we have guys who can play your spots, so we're going to let you go. Like, that might be how it goes ultimately.
Yeah, they could. I mean, assuming they had the cap space for that, and they're not. I mean, if they were to do something like that, I'd have to assume they're probably out on like a Tremaine Edmonds or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's a lot of money to throw out there if you still have that. Unless they're like, all right, we're doing this, so now let's rip that money instantly.
Yeah, it's going to have to be a bang type of deal there.
It probably would. I agree. The Steelers are going to have to do something with Jack. An extension would be foolish. You can't do something like that.
Yeah, you can't do that.
I am not a fan of tacking on the Chiefs like the 49ers. Those teams should do those type of things. A team like the Steelers, who is a middle of the pack team, there is no reason that you should try to tack on voidable years. Just say, I'm going to kick that can down the road somewhere. I'm going to worry about that money later. Well, later might be your Super Bowl window. It's not now, it's later. So I'm not a fan of doing that. Because we agree that Steelers will do something with Jack, we're going to go ahead and cut him for the sake of this. And Steelers are going to move up from $13.2 million in salary cap space to $21.2 million, which is a sizable savings right there. Next down on the list in terms of cap number for next year is James Daniels. Obviously, Steelers aren't getting.
Yeah, he'll be sticking around. Yeah,
absolutely. The next one, though, it's funny that so many of these players, these cuttable players, are like high on the cap number list for the Steelers. Mitch Trubisky's cap number, $10.625 million. That is a lot of money for a backup quarterback, Shane.
So my problem with this one is we've already heard comments that he's apparently going to probably be here, according to Rooney. The problem is that's foolish. It just is. Like, it's nothing against, like, I understand Trubisky is a very good backup to have. It's not like he's, the 64th best quarterback or something in the NFL, like, where he is truly like barely a backup. That is not what his situation is. But for a team that doesn't have a ton of cap space and needs to make some moves here to try to get into true playoff contention, you cannot pay your backup so much, not only more than most backups, but more than your starting quarterback on a rookie deal. Like, you can't be that team that does that. It's one thing if you weren't sure that Kenny was the guy, but at this point they know he's the guy. He started most of the games. He already beat Trubisky out basically by just existing this past year. Like, there's no question that he's going to be the guy starting week 1 unless there's an injury. And you could say, like, with injury, it'd be great to have Trubisky, but he's not so good as a backup that you need to spend $10 million on. It doesn't make sense. It saves so much money. I hope that, Rooney doesn't meddle with that and lets the coaching staff and the front office decide, like, we can find a backup elsewhere for, closer to $3 million opposed to $10 million.
I've yet to hear a logical argument, Shane, as to why we should keep a backup quarterback at over a $10 million price tag who averaged 15 points a game for the Steelers last year and failed to move the ball. I mean, there's a reason that Trubisky got benched 3.5 games into his Steelers career because he was playing poorly. And now he did come back and he played a good half against the Buccaneers. And that was the highlight of his season for sure. But outside of that, it was a pretty miserable showing. And not only that, I mean, we're going to go in the second part of this, we're going to go through some of those names of the quarterback position. Please tell me which one would have done that much worse than Trubisky. And you can have them for a fraction of the price. Like Tyler Huntley, this year. Pro Bowl quarterback
Yeah,
Tyler
Pro Bowl
Huntley.
quarterback Tyler Huntley.
He was on a price tag of $890,000. I mean, you can get these guys anywhere. And obviously when we talk about like rookie contracts, that kind of stuff is different. You can get veterans for cheap though, too. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So Shane, what do we want to do here with Trubisky? We're going to cut him. We're going to keep him.
The problem is I feel like for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to assume that he's going to be on the team to start the year, just because I think that's what the Steelers are going to do, whether we like it or not. So I think it's probably best to just work with him being on the cap.
Yep. And while I don't agree with the decision, I can certainly see that happening. So we are going to stay put with Trubisky for now for this exercise. And so the Steelers are staying at $21.2 million, as opposed to going to up to almost $30 million
exactly
in salary.
Right, yeah.
That would be my preference. Get the rest of your roster better. I'll worry about my pedestrian backup quarterback situation later
on. Yeah.
Mason Cole, Steelers aren't going to touch him after just giving him a deal last year.
Center,
Chris Boswell is obviously safe as well. These next two here have the same exact contract and the same exact cap hit. That's cornerbacks Ahkello Witherspoon, Levi Wallace. Both of them are costing the Steelers $5.4 million against the cap. Both of them would be a $4 million savings if either of them were cut. Now, I don't think that Wallace is going to get cut after the Steelers signed him last year, and he had a pretty respectable season. Witherspoon is the name, though, Shane, that's been thrown out there before. Is it worth the Steelers cutting a player like Ahkello Witherspoon? I know he was really injured. The sample wasn't good when he played. You could say $4 million, but again, we got to talk about displacement. It's not just the $4 million. It's I now need to put that money back into another corner. And so when I factor in displacement, am I getting a better cornerback than Ahkello Witherspoon in free agency for $4 million?
That's the question. And I think that for me at this point, I think if you are committed to drafting someone who you intend to play immediately and you expect to do that one way or another, I think that cutting him is perfectly fine, because again, he's a guy that is so hit or miss, even whenever he's been healthy, that you might want to just save that little bit of money. Maybe, just bring back James Pierre, who ended up playing over him because of injury anyway, who is at least whenever he does play, as long as he's used properly, he's not a bad player. He's more consistent, at least. He doesn't have the highs, but he also doesn't really have the lows outside of, getting run on deep whenever he is asked to cover deep, which again, if you just don't ask him to do that much, he'll be fine. And you bring him back for a couple million or whatever it ends up costing to bring him back, veteran minimum, whatever it is with his contract. I don't know with him being like with his contract, but doing that, having, Sutton obviously needs to come back, which we have to talk about, Wallace, and then Pierre. If those are your three guys plus a rookie, I'm okay with that. If it means saving a little bit of money, it just comes down to, do they need that $4 million to make a difference in what their plans are?
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't seem like a lot of money, but that can go, towards another player like Levi Wallace, or somebody that they would like to kind of start over in a clean slate, because Witherspoon, I think he can play really well. I think he can play really terrible. And he's just too high variance as a guy that you can count on. He's kind of getting demoted there already. And so I agree. I think Steelers probably will look to save that money there, even though I think that the depth is very important at the cornerback position. Obviously, you can't afford injuries. You need 3 to 5 players at a minimum that can play that role that you trust out there on the field at any given time. Like, I don't want to live in a world where we see Arthur Millette play a lot for the Steelers next year, or be on the roster necessarily. So they need to make sure, in different roles, obviously Millette plays like the nickelback role, but they do need guys they can trust. And I agree with you. I think the Steelers will target a cornerback probably in their first 3, maybe 4 picks this year, if not sooner. And so that would take that spot technically right there anyway. Let's go ahead and we're going to cut Witherspoon, and we are now at a little over $25 million in free agency money. Let's dig down the list right here. Najee is safe. Montravius Adams. I was not thrilled with the Steelers' nose tackles at all this year. I thought that Alulu was horrible. I think he needs to retire, and he did very well for the Steelers. Not trying to be hard on the guy.
For sure.
He came over. He's been an excellent signing since 2017, I believe, but last year was not good. And he was a 35-year-old coming off a season-ending injury. Alulu is going to be done. I'm sure his contract is expired. But what about Adams? Do the Steelers keep him because he's a veteran and he's a guy that's on the roster and they don't really have any other guys at the position? Or do they say, I'm not settling and I'm going to go ahead and save $2.5 million and put that towards a guy that we like better?
I mean, with the way that you can get run stoppers on the market for $1 million, it might honestly be worth it just for that reason, just because you
Mhm.
can find a more true nose tackle. Plus, I mean, if this is just me saying this, and we'll talk about draft stuff more in the future, but I would like to see Keanu Benton be the day one starting nose tackle for this team next year. But that's a different
Mhm.
conversation for another time. So ideally, I want to see them invest in this spot, and to do that, I think getting rid of a player that was barely on the roster last year and is already making not insignificant money. I think you go ahead and let him go and try to upgrade in other ways.
Yeah, Keanu Benton definitely popped at the Senior Bowl practices.
Yeah.
That was for sure. He would obviously be a huge improvement. And I do think the Steelers are going to finally target that position a little bit more heavily than what they have in years past. They know that run defense has got to get better. They got to find the guy up front there. So I can't see the incentive to keep Adams there. Again, we got to count for displacement. And so, Shane, what are we doing with this one?
I think at this point you got to just let him go. Again, like I said, I think you can reinvest that money elsewhere.
That would certainly be my decision as well. I don't think he does anything particularly well, honestly. And
No.
I think that he's not really any worse than a guy that you can pick up veteran minimum. I think we saw some examples of that. I think the Steelers made some poor decisions in the last couple of years. Isaiah Buggs was really good.
I knew you were going there with Buggs.
I think because it irritates me. It does, because the Steelers were so content saying, I want these veteran guys that have been here, that have this experience. And Adams came in last year, but Alualu was that guy that had that experience. Well, guess what? Alualu, you trusted the old guy coming off an injury, and he only played 2 games last year, and you ended up getting rid of Buggs, and Buggs played well. Mondo played for the Giants a little bit and did respectable. And so some of the guys the Steelers have gotten rid of these past couple of years have ended up being quality football players. And so it goes back to that conversation again, Shane. I think the Steelers need to stick with their young guys just a little bit more, maybe give them a little bit more opportunity. Instead of just saying, yeah, we're done with this experiment. We're just trusting our veterans, because eventually that's going to fail you, kind of like it did right here. So we are at 27.7 million. It's a good chunk of change to work with right now. And moving down the list, Kenny Pickett, safe. Alec Highsmith is safe. Kevin Dotson, I'm sure there's really no argument there.
No,
Starting guard for the Steelers.
He's going to be
at the very least, if he doesn't start next year, they're going to want him for purposes. And he's on a cheap rookie deal. Gunnar Olszewski, the Steelers could save $2 million by cutting Olszewski.
I'm indifferent about Olszewski, because his cap hit's so low that it really won't make a huge difference. But I'd also kind of just like to see someone else have that type of role with us. So I'm cool with letting him go. We have a lot of receiver depth, regardless of what we do in the draft or free agency. So
yeah, and because the price is so low on him, I mean, low in comparison to the general cap. I think the Steelers probably just bring him back for another summer at least.
Yeah, see what happens.
Yeah. So it's not like a pressing one where you've got to cut Olszewski to have money for this player. It's just
I don't think so.
$2 million there that we're talking. So I think that looks like just about all the names on the list. The rest of the guys are guys Steelers are either on rookie contracts or guys that Steelers are going to bring into camp. So let's take that money that we just created there, Shane, and that we're being pretty conservative for the most part, because we didn't do any, we didn't tack on any extensions.
Yeah, we didn't do any restructures, to
lower first year cap hits, no restructures. And so this is a pretty conservative estimate that we have right here at $27.7 million. Now let's take a look at the free agency board. We said we're not getting rid of Trubisky, unfortunately, trying to predict what the Steelers would do. Now, I do have to pull this up, though. I got to tell you, because fans are wondering. I mean, I've heard an argument, and I've heard it from some in Steelers media who think that it would be a really bad idea to get rid of Trubisky, and I just don't understand that logic. I really can't get behind it, because I think that Trubisky obviously is expensive. I think that he's a little disgruntled, and he kind of showed that because he lost his job so early. I think he's a guy, he's still a young guy who would like to have an opportunity, at least a chance somewhere to compete for a starting job. He does not have that in Pittsburgh. And so I think a mutual parting would be beneficial. And so I'm really having a hard time getting behind that, because he's not a high quality backup, at least not in Pittsburgh. Maybe he will be for another team, but we did not see that here. So just some of the names on the list this year, there's the higher end money guys. You've got your Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Jimmy Garoppolo, Teddy Bridgewater. Daniel Jones is going to get a new contract, so that one's not going to be on the table there. Jacoby Brissett, Geno Smith, he's got his deal. Joe Flacco might retire. I don't know. I don't want Flacco anyway. But,
no, I don't think so.
So there's those type of guys, but then you also have the Case Keenum, the Andy Dalton, the Mike White, CJ Beathard, Kyle Allen, Taylor Heineke, Blaine Gabbert, Chad Henne, Chase Daniel, Drew Lock, Brandon Allen, Josh Dobbs. I mean, Jeff Driscoll, Cooper Rush, Brian Ripien. There's so many names out there. And can you make a logical argument to convince me that Trubisky is clearly multiple tiers higher than these guys? Like, and I think what the argument needs to be made is, if Pickett misses a 4 to 6 game stretch, is Trubisky good enough? Is he that much better than these quarterbacks that he will keep you afloat during that time? And maybe the answer is yes. I mean, maybe there's a case to be made there. But obviously, if that happens, your season's in trouble anyway. So you better hope that Pickett doesn't get injured often, because every team that loses their starting quarterback is going to be in trouble. I just think that because these guys, and you're looking at all the contracts, $1 million, $1 million, 900,000, 800,000. I mean, these guys are cheap. So the price difference in the displacement level, after you replace Trubisky with another guy, you can net about $8 million there.
Yeah, and honestly, like, looking at those names, like, there's two guys that stand out. There's the guy that I think, if you really want to have somebody who can go out and win you a couple games if you need it, and you're very confident about that, and who still, even though he had a really good season overall, I still think he probably is going to be less expensive than Trubisky would be. Jacoby Brissett, we just lost to him in the regular season. Like, we just got beat by him. Like, he's a quality quarterback. He's not going to cost $10 million. I don't think any team is looking to pay him a lot of money, even though I think some teams might benefit from him being like a stopgap guy like the Browns had, but he'll probably cost less if you want like a high end backup. There's that guy. And then honestly, I know some people won't want to do this. Others will. I wouldn't hate to see Josh Dobbs back with Pittsburgh, I really wouldn't. I think he's a good backup quarterback. He is. I don't want to see him play. Honestly, it's for the most part. But again, the idea is that he doesn't play, and that if he does, he's familiar with the team. Like, he knows how Tomlin operates. He knows how the team operates. Like, he'll at least be able to come in and run the offense however Canada wants him to run it. And it won't be. I guess I just can't imagine that he's going to be much worse than Trubisky would be doing the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that because the way the Steelers offense is, I think he can replicate some of the things that Kenny Pickett is doing on offense in a pinch. Sure. And if he had to come in for a little bit, and obviously you're saving a ton of money there from Trubisky. And you look at on over the cap, the annual earnings of these quarterbacks. I mean, there were only 2 that earned over $7.5 million last year from the guys that are available in free agency, and dozens of names. One is Tom Brady, who is now retired. Yep. And in the other is Baker Mayfield, who was given a massive contract that he clearly didn't deserve. And so every other name on that list, we're talking about $7 million, then it drops down to $6 million, then it drops instantly down to $4.32 million. These are cheap backups. And if you don't think that Trubisky is at that much higher level than them, then let's take the displacement money and we'll put that towards something else. Because even like Mason Rudolph might be sitting out there because there's so many quarterbacks. Steelers can say, hey, Mason, are you okay at this point in your career, 27 going to 28 years old? Would you be all right being at the true backup? And we'll have you as the number 2 guy, not the guy holding the clipboard, but the number 2 guy behind Trubisky or behind Pickett in case Pickett gets hurt. And maybe he would be willing to go for something like that. And Steelers can save half of the money in after displacement. So just something to consider. But like we said, we think the Steelers, they're a little bit stubborn. I feel like when they make some of these big signings that they don't want to give up on people right away. And so that might be the case here. All right, Shane, we're going to skip over running back. I don't think Steelers are going to be interested in drafting or signing a running back in free agency with Najee and Jalen Warren. Wide receiver, is there any name out there? Or do you think that the Steelers would have any interest at all in trying to, first of all, is there interest in there? Would you think the Steelers would go after a receiver in free agency?
I think the problem is all the guys who could be quality like slot types to come in and play between Deontay and George Pickens are going to be guys who, because the receiver market's exploded, they're going to probably be a little bit too expensive for the Steelers to actually sign. And everyone who won't be expensive is going to be guys who probably aren't much better than the guys we'll bring back on depth deals, like having, Steven Sims come back and guys like that. Like, it's just, I feel like there's not that middle ground where you take a chance on a guy who's going to make like $3 or $4 million. Yeah. It's tough with the way the market is. That's what I think. I think the best route for them to get more receiver depth is just to take somebody in the draft in the mid rounds who can play slot, that type of guy.
I think that's why we're seeing teams do it so often. Like, there were 10 receivers taken before George Pickens last year in the second round. There were 6 guys, I believe, that went in the first round. And so teams are drafting receivers all the time because they know that they're valuable to offenses. They can get production out of them right away. And they know that once they do hit the market, if they're any good, they're going to sign for huge money. I mean, it's one of the highest paid positions in the NFL, the highest paid outside of quarterback position collectively. So they cost a lot of money, and it's just a bad receiver free agent class. And so because of that, you're not getting a guy that's starting over Deontay as much as some fans would like to have that. That's not happening. I mean, Deontay, if the Steelers cut Deontay, he'd probably be the best free agent receiver.
He'd at least be the best, true outside receiver for sure. Yeah.
Yes. And people would value him because he's still young, because he's had production. I mean, we're looking at the names like Michael Thomas, Nelson Aguilar, DJ Chark, Marvin Jones, Julio Jones, 34 years old, Brian Pringle, Jacoby Myers, who the Patriots might sign back. Alan Lazard is a name that's up there. He kind of does that same Z-type role, though. And Juju Smith-Schuster.
I know some people talk about that, which I mean...
there's talk there. But again, do we think that Juju suddenly got better at age 26 with the Kansas City Chiefs? Or do we think that, I know the injuries played a factor, but if we put him back on the Steelers, it's probably reasonable to predict that his efficiency is going to plummet way back down like it did before, because the Steelers aren't very creative on offense. And Juju was incredibly inefficient. It was like dumping the ball to a running back in terms of his yards per attempt when targeted. It was really, really low. I think it was at like 4.5 yards per target before he left. And then this year, it jumps all the way up to like 9.6 or something ridiculous for Kansas City. So he doubled his efficiency because he went to a better offense with a better quarterback and better coaching. And so that makes a difference. And so you don't want to overpay for that guy and have him come back and do what he did in 2020, 2021. That just wouldn't be worth it. And so I agree with you, Shane. I don't think the Steelers will really target a free agent receiver, at least not a notable name, maybe somebody that comes into camp, but they've got their starters in Pickens and Johnson. They've got their special teams guys that they like. Maybe they look for a slot receiver, a true slot receiver, something like that, but nothing in terms of big money. And so that leaves us still with that $27.7 million. And obviously we're not going to get into the free agents that the Steelers need to sign. They've got Cam Sutton, they've got Terrell Edmonds. And so that obviously will go towards that. That'll go towards that. We'll dive into that in a different show so that we have more time for that. Let's just stick.
We do have a chat real quick here, Tommy. I see someone has a question about what you guys think of Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald if they do the trade rumors. So Donald's not going anywhere. That's just not going to happen, I don't think. Ramsey is a question. I know he's been talked about a lot. I don't think that we're at the point that the Steelers are going to change that much. Although I would understand, like, if you can get them to pay some of his cap hit and get some of that money taken off, he could be a good deal, at least cap hit wise. I just don't think that they're at that point with the front office where they're going to start making big swings like that. I wouldn't hate the idea because it's Jalen Ramsey. You can't really be upset about that. But and cornerback obviously a need, but I don't see them in the sweepstakes for that unless they're really willing to pay a lot of the money on the Rams side. So.
Yeah, great question, Roy, and I'm glad you caught that there. I didn't have my chat pulled up. The Ramsey thing, I kind of agree with you, Shane, and Ramsey would obviously be a huge improvement to the secondary, but this is what I call one of those double gut punches here. Not only are you paying elite money for a premier cornerback, you're also giving up first round draft capital. And I think that at least that, and the combination of doing, I can stomach one or the other. And what makes it so difficult is to do that because, for example, for that money, if I threw that into a free agent cornerback like a Jamil Dean, who is a guy that's a little bit younger, who's played really well. Also, I don't have to get rid of the draft capital. I only have to get rid of money. And so I think that's the biggest difference between the two. I think he would make a big improvement to that defense, but those moves are hard to do, especially for a team who a lot of people would consider is still kind of rebuilding here. And so I don't know if this is that we got to capitalize right now window. This is our Super Bowl window. I think that could get them into a little bit of trouble into the future if they were to make a move like that. And then you get into a big financial bind in 2024 and beyond and saying, all right, now we're going to have to cut back somewhere else because we just added another massive defensive contract and we have no way of getting rid of that money and we're going to be over the cap. And so that was a good question. I agree with that though. I obviously make a big difference, but yeah, I think that one would be a little bit hard to stomach considering their situation. If they're a little bit closer to being those true Super Bowl contender, I think I could get behind
if
that.
they were coming off of a true playoff run, like win a wild card game, compete in a divisional game with a rookie quarterback, and so then we might be able to have that conversation, right? But they did miss the playoffs, so that was barely. They still did. There's a lot of issues still on this team. This is a move, again, the same reason the Rams made the move for Ramsey and for Stafford is because they knew they needed a couple more players to get over the top, and it worked out. But they are paying for it now. That's one of the reasons why he's in trade rumors, is because they need to find a way kind of out of that situation. And, they're going to take it. They're not going to be upset. Obviously, they got super out of it. But we're not at the point where taking that swing is justifiable at the very least. Even if it worked out ultimately, it's not something you do, it's not a no-brainer thing for sure at the very least.
Yeah, I agree. And great question again, Roy. And I agree that with you, the difference would be killer. I think though, that if the Steelers were to make one of those big moves like that, it would probably be for a player still on a rookie contract, like a Minkah Fitzpatrick type thing, where it's like, I can still get a couple, 2 or 3 cheap years of this guy. Yeah. And if it's costing me a first round pick, I can stomach that to get a guy I can build around rather than a guy that is like, we got to win right now with this guy. So just something to consider. Tight end, Shane, if we look at the free agent tight ends, what do the Steelers do with Zach Gentry, first of all? And do they explore a free agent tight end? I think obviously if Gentry comes back, there's no need to do so, because Steelers like what they have in Connor Hayward, and Freiermuth, obviously he's their guy.
I think Gentry's a good enough tight end too, or like looking for outside help at that position isn't really necessary, especially because if you want to upgrade from Gentry, realistically, you're probably just going to having to pay more money than is necessary for a tight end too. And if you want to just get someone who would be even cheaper than Gentry's going to be for us, at that point, you're really kind of taking chances on guys who probably haven't played a lot or shown much in the league. Gentry knows the offense as much as I wish he had to learn a new offense, which, we've talked about that enough. He does know it. He plays his role fine. As long as they just stop throwing him screens, I think that he'll be just fine as a tight end too for us. So.
Yeah, I think he's good in his role as that massive Y tight end that can block in line. He does his job. And now if Freiermuth gets injured, and like I'm saying, like a serious, and we've seen him get injured with the concussions and stuff, but if he suffers the knee injury at the end of the season, so fortunately that happened in the last game and it was just a sprain, and he'll be good to go. But I mean, his health is a little bit concerning. They might want I don't know, a better insurance policy, if you will, behind him. I love this tight end class, Shane. I think it's going to be really good.
That's the question the problem is, I think if you bring Gentry in, if you bring him on a deal where you can get out of it that same year and just like not really pay him any money, the draft class is interesting at tight end. Like you said, there could be guys that they view as true, like quality backups to what Freiermuth brings you, and not just a completely different type of player. So that's where things could get a little bit dicey with his future. But I think at the very least, I wouldn't be surprised if he comes back initially and then they kind of take it from there.
For sure. And some of the names on the list, just throwing them out here right now, and a couple of these guys are certainly not options. Dalton Schultz could get franchised or extended by Dallas.
Probably, yeah.
Mike Gesicki, Evan Ingram, Austin Hooper, Mercedes Lewis, Robert Tonyan. And then you go down a little bit and you've got guys like Kyle Rudolph, who's entering age 34 season.
Yeah, he needs to go.
Drew Sample. I mean, there are options in free agency. It's not a very good free agent. You can get Jesse James back if you want.
Oh yeah, good old Jesse James. I mean, isn't he just second? No, but
yeah. I mean, I'm not overpaying for Gentry. I will tell you that right now. Like I know that he's quality in his role, but I'm not. I mean, and I don't think they'll have to. I don't.
No, he's going to get maybe a couple million. That's the most. So yeah,
I am interested in the tight end class, however, and I would consider draft. Like, to me, I've got ridiculed for this already. If tight end is the best position on the board with one of Steelers' second round picks, if you still have an opportunity to nab one of those guys that can, I think there's a lot of value in that. I think you get a guy like Washington that could
he's
be
the
like
guy that people think
plus version of Gentry. In that Y role where you are just a mauling run blocker, you can be used in the red zone. I think there's a lot of value to that type of player. I don't know if the Steelers will have any interest. But
I think if Matt Canada wasn't the offensive coordinator, or you had somebody who you trusted to build an offense where they both get used, that would be awesome. But I don't know if that would happen early on. So
this is the big one, Shane. We haven't spent any money in free agency yet in our little mock free agency here, and so left tackle. There are a couple of names on the market. Obviously, the biggest one is Orlando Brown Jr. I believe he's been a 3-time Pro Bowler, had another solid season with the Chiefs. The question there becomes, does Kansas City just let him walk? They try to get him locked up to some type of deal. And I'm not sure what's going to happen there, but obviously a very good player would be a massive improvement over Dan Moore at left tackle. Would you, or would, I guess we'll do this for the Steelers' sake, would the Steelers be willing to fork up that type of money, $20+ million for a left tackle to have their left tackle of the future?
I don't think so. And honestly, for me, I don't think Orlando Brown Jr. is any better than maybe the 16th best left tackle in the NFL. I do not view him as a Pro Bowl caliber player. I know he's gotten to Pro Bowls. To me, when he was a right tackle for the Ravens, he was a Pro Bowl-ish quality player. Since he's been at left tackle, he's just not the same level of pass protector at left tackle. It doesn't handle it as well. I think that it was a mistake personally for him to play left tackle or demand to play left tackle, unless obviously if he can get a big deal from somebody, which I think he'll be able to ultimately do. But there's a reason why he's not already been re-signed by the Chiefs, despite them, sending draft capital to the Ravens to get him. There's a reason for that. It's because he wants to be paid like the best left tackle, and he's not really anywhere near that, in my opinion. So I don't think the Steelers would do it anyway, but I also don't think it would be a good move because although, yes, he would be better than Dan Moore, I think several rookies coming into this class are going to be better than him within a year or two, regardless. So I'm not going to spend $20 million on a guy that might not even be, like I said, a top 15-ish left tackle to me.
I agree with you, Shane. I think that is the way to go. I hope the Steelers have their choice when it comes to that 17th pick. I can see a scenario where the pickings are pretty slim already right there, but a guy like Broderick Jones or Paris Johnson, a true left tackle type, I think is really what they need. And they have to finally invest in that position because they haven't done it in so long. The Steelers have gone 26 years without taking an offensive tackle in the first round. That was Jermaine Stevens back in 1996. I believe I did my math right there.
Something around there.
It's too long. The answer is too long. And so it's a passing league. The teams pass 65 to 70% of the time. You've got to have a blindside protector. It's arguably the second most important position on your team. And the fact that the Steelers have ignored it like they have, it's a little bit frustrating to me. I got to be honest, but I agree with you. My motto in free agency, Shane, is you pay great money for good players. And that's typically what it ends up being. And so I hate to overpay as well. It is an important position. You are getting an upgrade, but it's an awful lot of money. And I don't think the Steelers would spend it that way. What I think that Steelers will probably do in free agency is they could maybe look for an upgrade over just like the Trent Scott, the swing tackle, maybe give themselves a little bit of insurance at the tackle position heading into the draft in case they're not able to nab a guy that they like there. I can see them doing something like that and just pretty on the cheap still, but they're not outside of that. I don't see, there's no names on this list. You got an old Eric Fisher, an old George Fant, an old Chris Hubbard, who used to be on the Steelers, who got overpaid by the Browns. There's just not good enough names out there that the Steelers would be worth spending money on that player. They're going to stick with their pretty young guys that they have under contract right now at the offensive tackle position, unless something happens in the draft, and which we're kind of both hoping for. I'm going to skip the interior offensive line. I don't think they're going to spend much money there. They did that last year. Let's move to the interior defensive line, where there are some very interesting names this year, Shane. I think the Steelers, if I had to guess right now, I think that the Steelers will spend the most money in free agency on an interior defensive lineman this year. Would you bet for that, or would you bet the field?
I feel like the field is still a better bet just because I could see them, and we'll talk about it in a minute. There is a linebacker that we all know is being tied to them for multiple reasons. I think that that's still a possibility. We'll talk about that, but it would make a lot of sense because I think that when you look at free agency, both as far as who's available in free agency, different positions, and also, where they're probably going to be looking to draft guys at, it would make sense if they're not going to draft defensive linemen high because they focus on offensive line and corner and all that, spend the money then in one of two positions, either linebacker or defensive line. So I think it's definitely a decent bet. I will say, though, there's potential that they kind of get priced out of some of the guys that would be true like big upgrades with some of the money that teams have, especially one team. The Bears have a lot of money. I think they might throw a lot of that defensive line we'll see there.
Shane, if I were choosing, my focus would be I want to take this wad of money and I'm going to look at these interior defenders this year because I think that's where the value is. I think you can get guys because it's a deep free agent class in terms of interior defenders. You can get guys at a reasonable price. And I think when you compare it to something like linebacker, I think the linebackers are going to get grossly overpaid. I really do,
There's a good
unfortunately.
chance for that, yeah.
And it irks me so bad that guys like TJ Watt is considered a linebacker.
Yeah.
He's lumped in with guys like Tremaine Edmonds and guys like TJ Edwards. He does not play that position.
No, he
but the
doesn't.
NFL, they're a little bit behind the times here. We know that.
Yep.
But because his money jacks that price up, and some of the other players who are edge defenders who are labeled as linebackers, they jack the price up. And so now these teams are paying more for that. The franchise tag costs more for linebackers. It's not a great situation to overpay for free agent linebackers. And so looking at this class right here, my favorite name of the interior defenders is Daron Payne.
Yep.
I see so many similarities with it. I think you can finally have your Stephon Tuitt back type of player if you go after a player like Payne. And I know that he's not going to come cheap, but he's still a pretty young guy. He's going to be 26 years old this year and has played some really good football already. How would you feel about the Steelers doing something like that?
I think it just depends, again, how much money is he going to get? Because I've seen some people say he's going to get $18 million a year. I've seen other people say he's going to get closer to like 14, 15. I think the Steelers will be in possibly if it's close to that 14, 15 amount. I think if it gets above that, they're just not going to be willing to dedicate that much of their cap space to one player, especially a player that is, as much as he's going to be valuable for what they're looking for, one defensive lineman is not really what they need. They need kind of multiple guys, I think, at that spot. And I think they're going to try to address that mostly in the draft and maybe some lower end free agents. But I would obviously love to have a guy like him. He's, like you said, he's young, he's talented, he's already been in the league. Obviously, he's coming off his rookie contract. Washington was a weird situation because they kept drafting guys in the defensive line, and then like only some of them played. Sometimes their whole draft strategy was not bad, but it just didn't really work out, I think, the way that they wanted it to. I do think, though, with Payne, he's pretty much, I would be very surprised if he's not a Chicago Bear. That's just kind of what I think. I think he's going to be the first person that they call on the first day of free agency, or in the, whatever we're calling legal tampering period, whatever it is. That's the first call he's going to get is from Bears. Like, how much money does it take for you to say yes? That's basically what they're going to say, I think, to him. That's my number one concern with Payne.
I can see that happening as well. And if you recall, we talked about this before. Larry Ogunjobi had a deal with Chicago that fell through because it failed a physical. And I think they were worried about his health. It was one of the two. And
something about his foot. There was a foot.
But he had, I think he was set to make something like
14 million. I think it was 3 years, 42. I think is what it was
per year. And he was going to get paid a lot. It's worth mentioning too that Ogunjobi is a free agent, and so we'll see what the Steelers decide to do there. I don't think that he was impressive enough that I would spend good money.
Yeah, like not a lot of money.
Not a ton. I still think you could argue that he's still the best interior defender behind Cam Hayward, but it's not a very high bar to high bar to clear right now. I just think that they need to go out and get another cornerstone football player and then also look in the draft. I think that's probably the way to go at this point, because trying to piece those puzzle pieces together these last couple of years really just hasn't been paying out for them. There's also some other names out there. You got a run stopper like Dalvin Tomlinson. Javon Hargrave is going to be back on the market again. He's going to be pricey after the productive season he just had with the Eagles. Fletcher Cox is another Steelers considered trading for in the past. He's up there in age with Cam Hayward, and so that would obviously be just a short-term type player. Ashawn Robinson and a few others. It is a strong class. Chris Wormley is also a free agent, but he suffered the injury, and so the Steelers, maybe they bring him back in camp. I'm not really sure what happens with that situation there.
Hard to say. Yeah.
Definitely a strong group there. Let's look at edge defenders real quick, and we'll speed this up because I know our show is running a little bit long today.
Yeah.
The Steelers need an upgrade over Malik Reed, and I don't care how you do it at this point. I think the draft is still an option. Obviously, you look like third, fourth round. And I would be willing to go higher than that because it's an important position. If Watt gets hurt again, you can't stomach what happened last time. You have to have a better option than that. So some of the options out there this time around, you got Robert Quinn, Yannick Ngakoue, Jadeveon Clowney, Cleveland Farrell, Arden Key, Melvin Ingram, Justin Houston, Lorenzo Carter, Marcus Davenport. There are some guys. I don't know if Steelers would be able to pay for that level of guy or what we're looking for exactly. They did try to get themselves in that Melvin Ingram situation. We know that didn't work out very well for them. But if a guy knows his role, say you're playing limited snaps, maybe 20 to 25% of snaps behind Watt and Highsmith, they need that guy. Dante Fowler, I think, would be a good fit for the Steelers on the Cowboys this year.
Yeah,
someone like that.
Flexibility there. Yeah.
would certainly be an upgrade over Reed for sure. And I think that you have to at least have that going into the draft. And so that by the time the draft rolls around, you don't say I have to draft an edge defender in X round because I don't have one on my team yet.
Right.
So yeah, I think that there's plenty of options there. It would be upgrades over what they have right now that would give them a little security. So some of that money I think would go to that. I would assume that they draft. You think that they draft or sign an edge defender in free agency this year?
I think they could. A guy like, just because of the fact that like the shine is worn off on him and he just didn't really work out. A guy like Farrell from Raiders could be pretty cheap, and I think he's a quality, like especially edge setter guy. Like he's not the best pass rusher, but again, you're not really looking for like an elite pass rusher as your third guy. Usually, just doesn't work that way. He's a guy that can play, and I think he would be a decent fit. But again, you just want to find a cheap guy that like has experience, that you're confident can actually somewhat set the edge and rush the passer. Reed just couldn't do that. They did bring back Roche on a futures deal, I think it was, right? After he didn't resign with the Giants. So that's cool too. You know, I wish we would have kept him from the get-go, but that's neither here nor there. But you know, you have some more guys there that I think you can improve upon from Malik Reed. And then in the draft, I still think, like, and you said it too, Tommy, like if you're sitting in the third round and the best player is an edge player, I don't care if you take them. Like, it's just, I know it's not the biggest need technically, because again, you hope that that guy doesn't have to play a ton of snaps, but at some point we've seen like it's probably going to happen. And I'd rather have a guy who is talented and has an actual chance to be a good pass rusher out there to play snaps than some of these other guys we've had out there the past couple of years.
And I think it would be wise to give Highsmith and Watt those type of breaks too. I think that
if you can,
good teams should deploy 2 rotations of edge players where they can keep their guys fresh and not just game by game, but by the end of the season. You don't want those guys completely worn out. The Steelers get into playoffs. So I think they will. I think they'll spend maybe something like in the $4 or $5 million range
that would be
on a competent number 3 edge player there. I think that if they did something, that would be my guess. Let's talk about linebackers here.
Yeah.
I think there's a strong case to be made that linebacker is the worst positional group on the Steelers. I mean, you've got Devin Bush and Robert Spillane are free agents this year. Bush is not coming back. We said Spillane probably will in some capacity. And Miles Jack is a cuttable type player because of the money that he's due. And then you got Mark Robinson. That's it. I mean, that's basically it. I'm not even counting Marcus Allen is a linebacker at this point, and he's been around for this long and hasn't played defense really. He's a special teamer. So, I mean, the Steelers, obviously, my prediction, Shane, is they go out and spend pretty good money on one linebacker, and they also draft one probably in the first 3 rounds of the draft.
I would like to see them address linebacker in the 2nd or 3rd round this year. I think there's some guys that definitely fit the bill for them that I think would be quality players that could play right away. And yeah, if you can bring in a starting caliber linebacker, that's not Robert Spillane because he's not starting caliber, despite the defensive coaching thinking he is, then that would be ideal. I think it goes from a true weakness to at least a position where you're not concerned about your week-to-week performance. I don't know if they're going to draft one relatively high. I feel like if they're going to draft a linebacker, and then they've shown that when they draft one, it's either very late or very early. I kind of want that sweet spot if you're looking for, you know, the best linebackers in the league are all 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Like that's where you find those guys, right? There's a reason for that, I think, but that's really neither here nor there. But if they do bring somebody in, I do think it's probably not going to be one of the higher end guys. Like you said, I think they're going to get priced out of that market. I'd like an Edmonds because I would know, like I have a guy that's a very quality player. You know, you have guys like David Long from Tennessee. Like those guys are just going to make a lot of money though. Like you said, I just don't see us paying them that much money. And I don't know if it'd really be smart either. You know, unless you're not spending your cap on anything else and you just need to upgrade somewhere and they're the guys that are available, then fine. But outside of that, I don't think it's smart.
I agree with you there. I think if you are to spend that elite money, do it for a guy like Jamil Dean or a top flight corner or something
just
else.
Address that position then too.
More important position. Yeah, I'd hate to lock that much money into a linebacker, a position that gets injured pretty often. It's not as important. I think in a lot of ways, linebacker is like the running backs of the defense today, is where you need a lot of other things up front, and there are more important positions. And so I'd rather go trenches. I'd rather do something else with that money. But I agree with you. I think that if the Steelers do spend on a linebacker, they probably miss out on the David Long and on the Tremaine Edmonds. They probably miss out on that top tier of money wise, and they're probably the next tier down from that. I would personally love even like a Leighton Vander Esch type player who I think had
Yeah,
another
just somebody
solid
who
year
can
with Dallas.
play. Yeah.
Somebody like that, and you get him for quite a bit cheaper than those other names on that list. I think that would probably be the way to go. And then you'd give yourself a little insurance there and an upgrade at the position and some flexibility in the draft. But I agree with you. I think day 2 is the way to go in the draft when it comes to that. Safeties this year, I don't think the Steelers will need to do a blasted thing at safety, assuming that they get Edmonds back somewhat on the cheap, and I would try to get DeMonte KZ back too. I think that having those 3 guys, obviously with Fitzpatrick, is it makes for a pretty solid back end.
Yeah, as long as you bring the guys back you had at the end of last year, I don't really care what else they do. If they want to draft somebody late to be kind of the 4th safety that is able to play defense, but also can be a special teamer, if they want to sign somebody that's really cheap to play that for, whatever they want to do outside of that, I'm okay with, as long as those 3 guys are back. I think that is the trio of safeties I think that really work with this defense, that make that defense work. And it will help your linebacker core out because, again, Edmonds can play more of that linebacker role if you have 3 safeties that can legitimately play. That's something I think is very important. I'll be very surprised if they don't at least bring back Edmonds. I mean, KZ could end up leaving, but I doubt it. He didn't really play a whole lot last year, and what he did show is good. Maybe not good enough to really make a lot more money, though. So I think the Steelers could bring him back.
Yeah, and they're not going to go and pour that much more money into that position. So
not after
I'd be really shocked. No, and out of all the positions, I might be the most shocked if they threw money at a safety this offseason. That's not happening. I think they're probably just going to look to bring back that chemistry, bring back the guys they already had on the roster this past year. Cornerback position. This is one, Shane, along with interior defensive line, that I hope the Steelers do end up spending a little bit here, because it gives them a little flexibility. And now I do like this cornerback class a lot, and I still think the Steelers should be targeting a lot of those guys, because I think would be a significant upgrade over what they have. But you have nobody on the roster essentially outside of Cameron Sutton. I mean, nobody that I trust, at least, and guys that certainly need upgraded. I think that Levi Wallace would be best as a CB3, where you don't have to count him as much. Yeah, just have him play boundary in nickel. But I think he's obviously a guy that could be upgraded, and I think the money that he signed for shows that as well. And so there are some big names out there this year. There's the James Bradbury, there's the Jamel Dean, those type of players. I don't know if Steelers will go that big. They never do. So unless things change, maybe they change a little bit under the direction of Omar Khan and Andy Weidel. And so maybe they would be more willing to do something like that. But chances are probably not, because Cameron Sutton needs a contract. And so that's probably going to come as their top priority this year.
I think that's kind of what screws it up a little bit for them as far as going after corners, is they already have to sign a high quality corner themselves back to their team. Yeah. And then they'd have to put even more money then back into corner from there. So I think that it's probably unlikely. I just still think corner is the sweet spot in the draft at either 17 or 32, whichever is the better fit based on the board. That seems most likely. They may even draft 2 guys in the first, 100 picks or so that they have. So it just comes down to, I think, what is available in free agency ultimately for the right price. Again, if you cut Witherspoon, can you get another corner around that same amount of money that you trust more, that has a little bit more consistency in their game? That would be really good, I think. But it's likely that they're looking at, Sutton, Wallace, and then some rookie of some kind. So.
Yeah, and I think that I don't think there's any way that they let Sutton walk. I know the choice isn't really up to them. I mean, they have to come to terms, and he's unrestricted. But after losing Mike Hilton, seeing what he's been able to do for the Bengals there, knowing how weak the position is already, I think that they make that a priority. They probably overpay for him a little bit.
They have to,
and they keep Sutton around for the long term. And because they're doing that, I don't think they'll spend much at all in free agency. They'll probably look to fill that in the draft. All right. That's pretty much everything for us today. Is there anything else that you need to touch on, Shane?
No, I think this is a good outline. We'll get deeper into trying to, I'm sure we'll both kind of come up with some targets, specifically different positions that we want, getting into closer to free agency after the Super Bowl is over, all that good stuff. But I think it's a good way to kind of illustrate where the Steelers are at right now, cap space wise, and what kind of things they could possibly do if they wanted to do it.
Absolutely. Looking forward to all that stuff to come this offseason. Thank you for joining us today on the Still Curtain podcast. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can check out the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast, and also check us out on YouTube. And thanks for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.